Are you a solopreneur, a team of 5 ready to scale, or a remote team in SLC looking for a new space? Look no further. The Square has everything you need. Fast Wi-Fi, meeting rooms, great coffee, daily breakfast and snack, and a vibrant community to keep you inspired. From dedicated desks to private offices and enterprise suites, there's a space for you. No matter where you are in the journey, the Square has a spot to help you succeed. Check out the Square's co-working and flexible office space today and take your work to the next level. Let's be honest, we're all juggling a lot these days. Between work, family, and everything else, the last thing you need is to spend hours dealing with car-related tasks. That's where Fleetly comes in. Fleetly is your personal car concierge service designed to give you your time back. Need an oil change, car service, ride to the airport, Fleetly takes care of it. Want your vehicle detailed or even sold? Fleetly's got you covered. No more waiting in lines, no more wasted weekends at the shop, just more time to do what really matters. Whether it's growing your career, enjoying moments with your family, or just kicking back and relaxing. Right now, Small Lake City listeners can get 10% off with code SLCPOD at checkout. Visit Fleetly.com and let them handle the hassle so you don't have to. Again, use SLCPOD at checkout for 10% off.
You know what? I'm going to make a separate restaurant. It's only going to be focused on what I like and what I love, and that's going to be the restaurant. My mentor ended up getting me a sponsorship visa. When I picked up the ladle, I got corrected, and everything's at that level of perfection. Yeah. But to have shops that make all 5 elements in-house from scratch, very few in the United States, and I know most all of them. Wow. What real ramen tastes like we're using really good ingredients for a reason, so you can actually taste the difference.
What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Small Lake City Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Nilsson, and it's no secret that winter has finally shown up this year, and if there's one thing I crave on a snowy, cold day, it is a nice, warm bowl of something. And if there's one thing that's taken the cake more often than not recently, it's been ramen. And if I'm choosing ramen, I'm usually going to Ramen Ichizu. Today's episode, I sit down with Mike Harrison, the founder of Ramen Ichizu, but also the founder of Hana Ramen up in Park City. He talks about his journey to learning as much as he can about ramen, perfecting his recipe as much as he can, and took him to a journey to he now spends about a month out of the year living in Tokyo to learn how to make the best ramen possible. And with Ichizu Ramen, he is making his favorite ramens that he's ever tasted around the country, around the world, around Tokyo, around Japan, to share with us. So let's hear more about his story. If you haven't been yet, make sure to go, and this should make you more excited to go if you haven't yet. So I hope you enjoy me and Mike's conversation, and I will see you on the other side. Enjoy. Because it's been fun to see. I've been on a big food kick on the podcast. Like, I realized it today that I was like, wait, so we're talking today. Last week was Hana Bannock of,
Kombucha.
Hans Kombucha, yeah. Before, I guess that was art. But I think like within the last 2 months, there's been a lot of food. But like for 2 reasons. One, there's always a good story behind it because owning a restaurant, operating a restaurant's a grind. Yep. And to have someone say, you know what, I'm in, I'm going to do this because I'm passionate about something and want to have something come to life. And even talking with Mike, who does Utah Food Finds and then also does a lot of just like social media consulting for small restaurants. He's like, these people have these great ideas and then they're in a kitchen in the restaurant for 12, 16 hours a day to get, barely any margin. And especially in how hard it is right now in the food and bev scene, like I will always tip my cap to anybody who's like willing to step into that arena, which you've done now multiple times. Yeah. So I'm excited to hear, more of the story, how you came to do it and like the inspiration behind it all. But I don't even know how it started. Are you from Utah or where did this story begin?
I transplanted in Utah in 95.
Okay.
So I went to high school here, grew up here at the end of, my youth. I spent a good amount of time in Utah. So I pretty much can claim it at this point as a Utah native.
That tracks. And what brought where did your family come from there? Or what?
I was a military kid.
Got it.
So I lived everywhere.
That tracks. What were some of the most notable ones that you remember from that time?
I lived in Germany before the wall fell.
Oh, wow.
And the base was so close to the wall, you could hear the gunshots at night.
Crazy.
So that was a wild childhood trauma.
Yeah, just a little different than typical.
Yeah.
I don't have those memories, but if I did, actually, that's a lie. When I was on my mission, I lived in this city called Yakima, Washington, which is ironic because they have this billboard when you go in that says like the Palm Springs of Washington, which is a joke because it's like, it gets its claim to fame because all the drugs come in through the port in Seattle, goes into Yakima, and then it goes either north, south, or west or east. And so not a great place, but I remember going to, when I lived there, there wasn't a single night I went to sleep that I didn't hear sirens. And it was usually at least once a week that there was gunshots. And like it slowly just kind of, it's weird when it got normal. Where I was like, oh, yeah, I guess we're just going to go to bed. Yep, there it is. That's probably over on that street over there. That's where that always happens. But yeah, I mean, especially being in Germany during that time, that's insane.
Yeah, as a kid, you're just like, whatever. But as an adult, you're like, that's not a good sound, hearing gunshots and sirens, and then it stops. And when you're an adult, you know what that means.
Yes.
It's a little different meaning than as a kid.
Yeah, it means the cops got him. The bad guys are gone, right? Not so much.
Not so much.
But I mean, in your childhood, what role did food play? I mean, did that set a lot of the stage for what you did later down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge foodie. I've always loved food, and like amateur cooking at home, that type of stuff, making steaks, making different food, and really enjoyed that, but it didn't really translate to much later in life because I had no culinary background before starting this, none whatsoever. So I went from 15 years roughly of IT and telecom to a sporting goods store for a minute and then doing ramen. So none of them crossed over at all.
Yeah, and, it's hard to think of IT and ramen having, I mean, there's probably some sort of overlap or some sort of help along the way, but not as much as other stuff.
No, no crossover.
So you came here for high school, moved here in 95. I mean, did you go to school here and then study, computer systems, computer science, and then you start working from there?
Yeah. Worked for the phone company for quite a number of years. So, yeah.
And was there always kind of this wrestle inside of you of like there's something else you wanted to be doing or should be doing, or was it just kind of normal for a while until you had other ideas?
Yeah, I mean, it as far as the ramen, it's purely a passion project because at the time I had another business. I was getting out of that business. I didn't know exactly what to do with my free time. And at the time, I just started eating ramen, really fell in love with it. And I was like, oh man, this is really good. And as I would travel anywhere I would go, I was like, who's got the best ramen? Try it. I'm like, oh, this is really, really good. And then I had the wild idea to, why don't I just open a ramen shop? How hard can it be?
The famous last words.
Yeah. How hard can it be? Extremely hard.
Yes. You're like, I learned that the hard way. But when you were, getting into ramen and having that kind of open up this, world that you weren't as familiar with, were there any places that you went to that stick out to you or that inspired you? Or was it mostly just kind of ramen in general?
Before I went to Japan, there was a place in Seattle. I can't remember the name of the place now, but they were a Japanese chain. And that was one of the first ones I was like, wow, this is really impressive. And it was a pork python. And of course, now I rarely eat pork pythons now, but back then that was like most Americans, that was the first thing you've had is creamy pork python. That's your first ramen experience. And, but in any case, that was the first one where I was like, this is really good. I can't remember the name of it though. That's the only problem.
Were you just traveling in Seattle or were you living there?
No, travel.
Okay.
Travel.
Because I lived in Seattle for like 4 years and that was the first place I ever had ramen.
Oh, nice.
Because I was working in, for an investment bank doing mergers and acquisitions. And part of the bank was really focused on food and bev and restaurant. And we were working on this deal for this ramen place that I can't remember the chain of either. But it was like the first time I ever had like ramen, because everybody's had, cup of noodle, instant ramen, whatever. And whenever I tell someone like, oh, let's go get ramen, like the young culture will be like, well, why would I do that when I can just, I'm like, listen, there is so many things that I want to tell you right now, but don't even want to give you that when come check it out. And so that was the first time where I was like, oh, this is good. And then I had a friend, similar to how you said, where you were traveling and every time you would go try to find the best ramen place, two of my friends that live in Portland always do the same. And so they came up to visit me and my partner at the time, and we went to this other ramen place. And that was like the first time where I was like, oh, this is phenomenal.
You're like, wow, there's a lot going on here. Like I thought it was just going to be like fancy cup of noodles. And it's like, no. This is not fancy cup of noodles. It's completely different.
Exactly. So I understand how you could have this and be like, I'm going to do this. And it vaguely reminds me of, Brandon Leung's story of when a pandemic hits, he's like, I want to learn how to cook, but not just cook, but I want to cook a recipe that I can just perfect and iterate on and make better. And he started with an Italian dish. And he's like, why the hell am I doing an Italian dish? And so that's when he started, trying to make pho and then trying all the pho that comes into the pho graph. And now ramen and banh mi. I don't go to an Asian restaurant without DMing Brandon first and being like, where do I go? What do I get?
Yeah, Brandon knows for sure. He's got his finger on the pulse and no BS and tells it like it is.
Well, even the last time I went to Ramen Ichizu, I DM him first because I had 3 friends like, hey, we just got done with yoga. We're going here if you want to come. I was like, I'm actually just dropping something off. I'll meet you there. And so I DM Brandon, what do I get? He's like, oh, get this is the special. And then I see you, I talked to you and you said, you're like, did you get this? I was like, yes, I did. Perfect. Brandon knows best. But so you want to come back. So you start making ramen. And I'm curious of how you go from this idea of like, I'm going to start a ramen place. I want to make ramen to then ending up in Japan, studying it and diving in arguably the best place possible.
Yeah. Cause when I first started making it, I, just things I saw online, Ramen Lord, there's some Reddit threads. There's a bunch of different online places you can get information on how to make ramen. And a lot of it's okay, but it's not like at the time the ramen I was making was good for home. It was terrible for a restaurant. It's like not even there, not even remotely. And one of the big things I was trying to figure out, okay, like who's like the best in the US, and ends up being a small world, but Ramen Shack was really famous, and Keizo, and I was like, okay, where did he learn? And I figured out where he learned, and I was like, okay, well, that's who I need to learn from. And that started the process of, originally, this all happened during the pandemic. So Japan was locked down. So I couldn't travel to Japan. And so like the first 5 months I was doing everything on Zoom. I was learning to make ramen on Zoom with no culinary experience. And ramen is not an easy thing to learn. And so that was my first 5 months, was just learning on Zoom. And then my mentor ended up getting me a sponsorship visa. So Japan was still closed, but they would allow sponsored visas in. And so I went there during COVID. It was the first time I trained in person. It's got to be an
interesting experience.
And it was awesome because like all the hard to get into restaurants, you can just like walk in, because COVID, everybody, there was no tourists. There was no tourists. So, but yeah, that was a fun time.
And when you had gone over there, had you already opened up your first ramen spot, or are you still prepping?
No. Okay. So still in development, trying to figure out. Actually, I may have opened a spot in Tooele by then. Okay. Yeah. I didn't quite get to Park City yet, but yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize there was one before Park City.
Yeah, there was one in Tooele for just a minute.
Okay. So, and how did you, you talk to all these different ramen owners in in the US and say, okay, cool. Like, where did you learn this? Which I always love that approach. Like, you see a lot of, influencers and videos where people will go to like LA and they go to their favorite taco place. Like, okay, if you were getting tacos, where would you go? And it's always like this adventure, but to be like, where did you learn? Where did you learn to get to like, the top of it all? But how did that process go from, because it's one thing to know who someone is, but it's another thing to get from there to, hey, by the way, I just got you a special visa. Come, let me teach you how to make ramen, and we're going to go to the best places because we can.
I think part of it's just being stubborn, dumb and stubborn, and like, I'm determined this is how it's going to go, and I'm going to put 100% into it until I get there. And that's basically what I did. Yeah. Hey, and so it's like, that's who I need to learn from, and I'm going to make it happen. So
got it. And talk to me about Japan. And when you're starting to study with him, you're starting to learn all. And what's his name, by the way? I remember I looked at it.
It's Koitan-san.
That's right. And tell me about that experience. Because again, if you come in from, Zoom classes and just trying to figure everything else in your kitchen, thinking it's good, but not great, nothing you would put in front of someone. What did you learn over there? What were some of your biggest takeaways that really made it a unique experience? Oh,
it was pretty eye-opening from day one. So ramen is not Western soup. It's not pho either. So most people think you just got a big pot of soup. You just pick up a ladle, put it in a bowl. Here you go. That's not ramen. That's not how that dish works at all. there's 5 elements to a bowl of ramen. So you have the broth itself, you have the tari, which is the flavor component, you have the aroma oil, which adds depth, and then you have the noodles, and then you have the topping. And the way it works, it's not just you just scoop a ladle of broth, throw it in a bowl, and serve it. It doesn't work that way. So when I first went there, I was corrected immediately because I was thinking American way, like, okay, well, the tari ladle, you just pick up the tari ladle, put it in the bowl. Next, you put the oil in. Next, you put the broth in, then the noodles and the topping. No, that's not how it works. When I picked up the ladle, I got corrected, and it was, I want surface tension from one edge to the other, not a drip underneath, not a pregnancy bubble of the ladles. I want perfect surface tension, edge to edge. That is a correct ladle pour, and you pour it away from yourself and make sure every drop goes into the bowl. Look at the ladle. Is it perfect? Now you can continue. That's one ladle. Now you also have to do the oil, the soup, the noodles, and the topping. And everything's at that level of perfection.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of like the Japanese culture that I love, that I think is so unique to Japan, is everybody has a thing that they own and they will master it. I mean, there's so many handmade noodle places that have been doing it for generations, and every generation perfects something. And so I love that, again, you can come in with your American Western, let's call it ignorance, and being like, yeah, cool, I'm mixing it all together, but it's not turning out right. It's like, we're going to start very simple. Yeah. It's the same that actually Coach K, but he always starts every season bringing in all the returning players and everybody that just came from high school, and he teaches them how to put on socks right and make sure there's no wrinkles, and how to tie your shoes, because it starts that basic with so many things. And even then, you could have come in and been like, all right, cool, I'm trying to do this recipe, or this oil's not working well, I don't do. He's like, no. Grab the ladle. Nope, that's wrong. We're going to start this.
Yeah.
And so how long were you in, Tokyo, the first round?
First round, that was probably 3 weeks. Been to Tokyo probably 4 or 5 times now. Every time is about a 3 to 4 week deal. So
nice. And assume it's going back to see the man himself, and just continue to go try ramen and learn from him.
Going back, so most of the time I've been going back, doing a little bit of additional training with him, and then it's eating a ton of ramen. And then, the other thing is, last trip I had a friend that owns a ramen shop, just seeing how he does things and getting ideas from him. So a lot of ramen is definitely something, if you have a perfectionist streak and you really want to go down a rabbit hole, that's definitely the dish.
That makes sense. Because again, like you said, it's 5 parts.
It's 5 parts. It's not just soup and noodle. It's not that simple.
And everything else is like that complicated. Because because I talked to you about like even just the noodle making process, and the machine that you have there, all the ingredients and it's interesting, we'll come back to it, of what's from Japan, what's local, and how to think about that. But then the noodle's just one part, and then the broth is just one part. And to have that degree of, perfectionism and improvement time after time. And especially when it's like, oh, cool, there's so many different types of ramen that's like, oh, cool, this is just one dimension of this one part of that. And then I imagine if you change one thing there and you're trying to change another thing, then there's all sorts of adjustments to be made.
Yeah. And there's tons of different ramen out there too. And that's something, opening Ichizu was kind of a risk for Utah, because it's not pork python, which is, that's like the safe thing to do. If you're trying to open a ramen shop, do that. That's what Americans know. That's what they love. Sell them that. But I didn't want to do that because Hana, that's what Hana is. It's a very American friendly style ramen shop. And one summer there, after falling in love with shio and shoyu and tantan and Tokyo style ramen, I was like, well, that's going to be the menu. I'm going to sell this, and people wouldn't even sit down and even try it. And that's when I had the idea of, you know what, I'm going to make a separate restaurant. It's only going to be focused on what I like and what I love, and that's going to be the restaurant. Yeah.
And it's fun to see, because I just spend a lot of time in that area, whether I'm going to like Central 9th, Barnum, whatever. And it's always interesting because I'm trying to think if there's ever been a time when you have been open, when I've gone by and there hasn't been someone outside waiting. and which is a great problem to have. And again, I mean, especially when you're thinking of this idea and the risk that you have of like, hey, here's this ramen that if you go into Tokyo, it's all you'll be able to find. But if you come into America and it's damn near impossible to find. But I know it's good.
Yeah.
I know I've worked on this. I'm going to take a risk and have it all work out. It's got to be like a breath of fresh air. But also, I mean, it's nice to see people's palates in Salt Lake slowly start to get a little better.
Yeah. Utah's come a long way, especially in probably the past 5 to 10 years. The food scene has improved dramatically from what it was.
Agreed.
Because you grew up in Utah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know the huge difference. It's gone from just only greasy spoons to there's a little bit more diversity, a little bit better food out there.
Yes. And it's fun too, just to talk to everybody who's kind of played a role in it from, oh my gosh, Viet Pham, who opened up like the first real like fine dining set menu where he got a James Beard Award. And then now you have, pandemic, and it's always like this double-edged sword where we see a lot of restaurants go out of business. Yeah. And like, I'm always like the devil's advocate to look at the list and I'm like, I wouldn't recommend these to like a lot of people. And there's a couple in there. I mean, like Beltex going out was sad. SLC Eatery, I never went, but I heard good things. But everything else, I'm like, the things that are replacing these are things we should all get excited about.
Yeah.
But I want to go back for a sec to, opening up. So you have the place in Tula that you had for a little bit, and then Hana, and then now Ichizu. Now we've heard a little bit about kind of the difference between Hana and Ichizu and why you did it, but kind of want to hear, opening up the one in Tooele, kind of what you learned in going to Hana and kind of the differences between the three.
Yeah. So Tooele, at the time I lived out there and ex and kids and all that. So that's why we ended up opening out there. Learned a lot of lessons the hard way, especially about restaurants and employees and staff. And you could go on and on and on about the drama and the challenges of a restaurant, but that was a good learning experience. And then probably the most valuable thing I learned out of that whole experience was location, because it doesn't matter how good your product is. If you don't have customers that understand or can appreciate what you're doing, it doesn't matter.
Totally.
So yeah, that was a good learning experience. And, from there we transitioned to Park City. Of course, we were doing pork pythons, which everybody loves. We made house-made noodles. We were the first in Utah to make everything in-house from scratch, all 5 elements. And I think that's still, to this day, we're the only one. And it's rare. It's rare in Japan, and it's extremely rare in the United States.
Totally.
Because most people will source their noodles. Some people will make their soup. Most people are not making their tare. They're not making their oil. They might be making their topping. But to have shops that make all 5 elements in-house from scratch, very few in the United States, and I know most all of them.
Wow. So that's fun that you go from, again, like Tooele, you learn locations, everything. You're really grinding your teeth of learning what this is. Because again, like the difference between, IT and
restaurant completely different.
And so, I'm a similar person where, if I went into it, I'd be like, I've done harder things. I can do this. Yeah. This is dumb. Like I've seen other people do it. And then like a month later being like, okay, listen, I apologize. I didn't know what I didn't know, and now I'm here. And then it's like nice to be like, okay, location is important. The first thing you learn, and you're like, well, I'm going to go to where a lot of people are and are always looking for some sort of food. Like, we're going to Park City.
Yep.
And again, if you're showing everybody the most popular ramen, it's a flavor profile they're used to, and like a unique, fun way of saying, hey, listen, we make everything. To the point where you're like, okay, like people like ramen, but I want to make the ramen I want to make and go down to Ichizu. Because from it sounds like you tried some of these recipes at Hana and they maybe didn't go as well as you would have assumed, which is kind of bold.
They literally would not sit down, because I deliberately took it off the menu. Uh-huh. And the menu was only shio and shoyu. And I'm like, you do realize, like, these are pasture-raised birds, and my food cost is almost double, and the labor is almost double, and I'm selling it for the same price, and you don't even want to sit down to try it. But that's, Utah mentality, like, this is what I'm eating. I only eat this. And so, yeah, so that was definitely a challenge, because it became such a headache and a challenge where I was like, I am going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to open a restaurant to do what I want to do.
I mean, especially when you have this menu where like, this is all we have. Like, well, I don't want this. And be like, well, if you don't want it, I'm going to go open actually another restaurant that's only this.
Yes.
And I think I'm optimistic about this. Like, that's a big risk.
Yeah.
And like a kind of like, I mean, it's nice to know how this, I mean, the story's never over, but to at least know how it's going now, be like, wow, like it worked. I mean, especially when like, because the first time I went there and met you was the night that had, I mean, a lot of people over for like the soft opening. I mean, I don't know what to call it. I always hate calling things like influencer dinners or content creator dinners, but that's what it was. And like I'd been, because I lived really close to Coyote, however we want to call it. It goes back and forth, and like, which is great. I mean, even reading, Stuart Melling's article being like, this just elevated Salt Lake's ramen game so many levels. And then even talking to him and others about it after Ichizu opened, he's like, yeah. And then we just opened up a couple more because I like both. I mean, those are, if I'm going to ramen, I'm going to those two. Everything else is, again, it's just on wherever we go, that's fine. But it's nice with Ichizu where I see, again, you showed us how the noodles are made. You show us everything else. And I taste, I'm like, I get it. I get this difference to where, I mean, if someone mentions they want ramen, I'm like, I'm going here. Unless it's like, I mean, kind of like a date or like something we're going to sit down a little bit longer. And I don't want to be sitting, I mean, at a ramen place table for longer than I need to, then I'll probably go to Coyote. But so you open this up and I mean, were there any different challenges that you ran into with this batch compared to other ones? I mean, mainly just because of, again, like you said, where a lot of the costs are twice as much, the labor's twice as much. It's so much more of a labor of love. Did that change a lot of how you operated this one compared to ones in the past, or was it mostly just...
No, this one was new construction. So I built it the way I want it, which was, in Japan, you go to a ramen shop, you literally sit in front of the chef. There's maybe 7 seats. That's the entire restaurant. And he makes the bowl in front of you and hands you the bowl and you eat it immediately. And I wanted that experience to be replicated. So the first thing I did when I built it was, okay, the focus of this restaurant is going to be the seats on the cook line, and I want people to get bowls directly from the chef. So that was the first thing I did. And then behind, I put a couple of tables because it's America. People want tables. Yeah. They got big parties. But the core focus was, I want you to get a bowl directly from the chef, hand it to you the way it's meant to be, the way it's done in Japan. And so that was a thing that I did immediately. But yeah, I really kind of geared this towards how I wanted it. I mean, we didn't go all the way Japanese because things like, you haven't been to Japan, have you?
No.
So when you go to Japan, you go to a ramen shop, there's generally a ticket machine at the front, and then you buy the ticket. So you pay before you see anyone, and then you hand the ticket to the chef makes your bowl, and that's how it's done, which is, I feel bad that people give Coyote a hard time because, they got the QR system. It's like, well, that's actually closer to Japanese way of doing business. But I didn't quite go that far because people get weird about QR and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole thought process is, I want this to replicate the exact experience you have in Japan with a real ramen shop, even down to little things that only people that have been to Japan will notice, like tissues. I have tissue boxes.
Yeah, I've noticed that, yeah.
And I've got a 1-star review because of a tissue box. And I'm like, you just told me you've never been to Japan, because every ramen shop has tissue boxes. They don't have napkins. They have tissue boxes. And I point that out as a homage to actual ramen shops in Japan. Huh. So there's just little details like that most people have no idea unless they've been to Japan.
Yes. Why is it tissues instead of like napkins? Is there a reason, or just
that's just the way it is? Every shop I've been to in Tokyo is that way.
Interesting. Yeah. But I always love those little things where it's like, if you know, and if you don't, you don't. And that person gave a 1-star review obviously did not.
No. The funny things you get 1-star reviews about. I've had a 1-star review because an egg was brown. And it's like, the egg was marinated. It was supposed to be brown.
Yeah. Like, there's a whole process here that you don't even know.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Some people get really confident about things they think they know about.
Yeah. It's like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. But I kind of want to go back to the ingredients, because that's one thing that you pride yourself up is, hey, all the important ingredients are coming straight from Japan.
Yeah.
Everything else is sourced as locally as possible. And I mean, how do you bifurcate the two of like what you prioritize of getting from overseas and what do you get locally?
So yeah, there's a lot that goes into ramen. So obviously bones are very important because that's your broth. So we try to source as much as we can local pasture raised birds. Matter of fact, we're actively looking for farmers because we've pretty much maxed out our current farmer we've been using. So if anyone has a pig farm or chicken farm, please reach out, or an elk farm, please reach out to me because we need bones badly.
Deal.
But yes, the quality of the bones are critical, and it's a challenge in the United States because the chickens are killed so early here, the flavor's not even the same animal. Even something like Mary's organic chicken, which is, a nice chicken, but that's only 4 weeks before they kill that animal. And most of the chickens in Japan, they're killed 6 months, 8 months, a year, and the flavor profile is completely different.
Interesting.
So, when I'm looking for chicken, like the chicken farmer we've been using in Vernal, having that yellow fat, that older bird, even his, it's at 10 to 12 weeks before they process that bird. But even that difference is pretty huge compared to the 4 weeks of most commercial chicken. But the quality of the bones, the chicken, it's critical. And of course, I do want to source as much as I can locally as possible. I mean, if I could do everything local, I would. Matter of fact, I tried to use Central Mill flour for the longest time just because I want a local flour to use. But it's too challenging. The ash content's completely wrong. The protein's close enough, but it's not. It'll never be ramen flour unless I can get unless I can convince someone there to make ramen style flour.
Yeah, you're like, listen, I need a special batch.
Yes.
This is exactly how I want it.
I mean, some of the pizza flour is similar, but not similar enough.
What's so different about like a pizza flour? And
well, like
flour?
ash is the biggest challenge.
Okay.
I mean, you can get your protein around 12, 13%, so you can use that, but the ash content's completely wrong.
Interesting.
So the color of the flour, the aroma of the noodle, the taste, it's different than what you would expect from a Japanese noodle.
Got it. So flour is, for example, one thing that's coming.
Yeah.
From
So we're paying a fortune for flour from Japan. It's like $85 a bag.
Wow.
Versus if I source something local, it'd be a fraction of that price. But it's critical, the noodles. Someone famous once said, basically, if you're not making your own noodles, you're just a soup shop. Which was Sano-san, someone that pioneered the modern ramen industry in Japan.
I mean, it makes sense.
Like, and it makes sense. It's like if you're not making your own noodles, you're just a soup shop.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to. I mean, a lot of like Chinese American restaurants, they all source everything from kind of the same place. It's this playbook, and you're like, oh, this kind of tastes like this other place. Like, it's because it is.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, if you eat a lot of, unfortunately, most of the ramen in America, it's all pre-made. So you'll notice you'll go to a bunch of different places. You're like, this tastes just like the other one because it is the other one. It's the same. They sourced it from the same distributor. It's the same soup concentrate. It's the same frozen noodles. It's the same what everybody else is selling.
Yeah.
So,
because that's one thing, like when you say it out loud, it's like, duh, but people, I don't feel like grasp it enough, but because like good food has to come from good ingredients.
Yeah.
Like every time I see someone and they're like cooking with, everything that's like from, Walmart Great Value or like something like here. And it's like all of like the cheap thing. And like, well, no, duh, didn't.
Yeah.
And then that's when you start to refine like, oh, if I use this, something even as simple as like salt or pepper, like that'll make a huge difference.
Yes.
And so it's like all of these little things that if you can, it would be fun to do one day to have like a dish where it's like, hey, this is bottom shelf ingredients, nothing great, cheap as could be. And then we did like a medium and a high, be like same dish, same recipe, same measurements, exact, try it.
Yeah.
And I think that like, because that's one thing that, it comes through with everybody, even like talking about Mateo, he like quality over everything. And it's nice to know that is what happened. Even with like talking with Viet and Pretty Bird, like he's like, we don't get bottom shelf chicken. We don't get bottom shelf ingredients. If you don't want to pay I mean, $15, $16, $17 for a dish that's a quality dish, then don't. Then there's a place you can go to, but just know it's never going to be as good.
Exactly. I mean, there's a reason why our ramen comes in at $17, $18. It's not because we're using pre-made stuff like everybody else and we can sell a $10 bowl of ramen. It's not the same thing.
No.
And, it's like we owe it to put everything we can into that bowl for the customer. It's like part of it's, selfish. I want to make and replicate everything I had in Japan, but at the same time, I want other people to experience that. And it's like, no, this is what real ramen tastes like. Like we're using really good ingredients for a reason, so you can actually taste the difference.
And it's nice to see it so well received, because every person I talk to, because even the time I ended up there last time when I saw you, a friend's like, hey, we're going to go get ramen. I'm like, where are you going? There's only 2 right answers.
Yeah, it's either us or, yeah.
And they're like, we're going to Ichizu. I'm like, and that was the number 1 right answer. See you there in 5 minutes. Because again, I will go, if it's to have a social experience, if I need to see someone, I'll go pretty much anywhere. It's not about the food at that point. I'd rather have a good meal, but it's not about the food at that point. But when I get both, I'll take it all. And so, I guess maybe getting a little bit more of the details of the difference between kind of what you talked about, like the typical pork python that a lot of people are used to compared to what, if you were going to go to Japan and realize that there's tissues and it's not napkins, what is this difference from like how it's cooked, flavor profile, or maybe just like a little bit deeper?
So when you go to Japan, especially Tokyo is going to be chintons, which means clear broth, versus python, which means creamy broth. So most Americans just assume every ramen dish is creamy broth. And it's like, no. That's from southern Japan, a small area that dish came from. Most of Japan is going to be chintons. So you have a clear broth, and for Tokyo, it's going to generally be shio and shoyu. Shio meaning salt-based, shoyu meaning soy sauce-based. Those will typically be the primary bowls that are there. Now, from that, there's probably a dozen or so different styles outside of that. You can have anything from there's a monster bowl called jiro. So you take a soy sauce based pork soup and you just load it with a mountain of meat and vegetables and fat, and it's a monster. It was designed by a chef to feed college kids.
I was going to say, it sounds like an American.
Yeah, he was like, okay, how can I cheaply feed college kids with a lot of food? So it's got a lot of pork, a lot of veggies, a lot of fat. So and the noodles are insane. The noodles are monsters. They're like 230 gram portion starting point.
Which is compared to a
normal bowl, you're talking 130 grams.
Oh, wow. So it's almost twice.
It's almost twice as much. And that's the starting point. And that's the little bowl.
Yeah.
And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But that's just one style, jiro. That came from Tokyo area as well. And then, you got so many different things. Like you have dipping ramen, you have naboshi, which is one of my favorites. It's a dried fish. It's a little bit more of a stretch for Americans to get on board with the idea.
Most fishy stuff tends to be.
But it's not fishy. It's savory fishy, which is completely different. But yeah, there's just so many different styles of ramen, and I think I went on a tangent. I lost my track of thought.
Well, but that's what I love is you take a food, and again, everybody can have their experience, and we're just going to keep hammering home this pork python, but then be like, hey, by the way, here is, imagine trying a burger and being like, oh, this is a sandwich. This is the only sandwich.
Yeah, this is the only
world.
sandwich. It's no.
Well, have you ever had a French dip? Have you ever had a turkey club? Have you ever had a grilled cheese? Have you ever had and you could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And it's, probably not that in depth as ramen, but at the same time, there's so many different ways to slice and dice it, and to say here's this one from this one chain that I like. It's no, step out of your comfort zone a little bit, try something a little new. It's not trying something ridiculously different, but it's here's these different flavor profiles and things that can happen. Because that's one thing I love with food, is kind of experiencing everything to a level where you can understand the nuance between it.
Yeah.
And I didn't really understand that perspective on food until my cousin, when I was living in Seattle, my cousin and his boyfriend lived down in Portland area in Willamette Valley, and he's a chef, but he is all loves wine both because he's a chef and he loves wine. And when I was starting to drink wine, he's like, no, we're going to go here. We're going to do this. Yeah. And I find and I started to iterate on this in these flavor profiles, oh, I actually do know what I like and I do know why. And so in the same way, actually there was one time, it was when I moved back to Salt Lake, I was working at this place where it's very LDS focused, and I was sitting waiting for my cup of coffee in the morning. And this guy comes up, he's like, so like, what do you like? Like, why do you like this coffee compared more to this? And I was like, well, it's kind of like beer. No, it's kind of like wine. No,
No.
it's kind of like cheese or dark chocolate, maybe. Yeah. He's like, okay. I'm like, yeah, not the best analogy I could give, but at the same way, like, same thing with ramen. You're like, oh, cool. I know this. I like this. Don't like that. And really just trying as many things as you can. That's how you get an opinion and actually try to like new things. And that's one thing I love about, following Ramen Ichizu on Instagram and just seeing it's like the special is always like, for lack of a better term, special. Like it is something unique. It's something new. It's something you probably haven't had. It might be a little different, but you're probably going to like it.
Yeah, because so our bread and butter is shio and shoyu, and it's a Kodawari take on shio and shoyu. So meaning it's very refined. It's using premium ingredients. There's no MSG. Not that that's a bad thing, but there's no additive chemicals or shortcuts in it. So what you're tasting is pure umami. There's no shortcuts at all. But yeah, like Monday special, I try to mix it up because there's so many different styles out there. And it's like, short of getting on a plane to Japan, you'll never have these styles of ramen because nobody else is crazy enough to do it. Because it's like I said, there's a lot of selfish reasons because I like that bowl, and short of getting on the plane, I have to make that bowl.
Yeah. So I might as well make
a
big batch and kind of invite everybody over.
Yeah. So it's like, it's extra work. It's, that's another day, 2 day, 3 day process because there's no crossover. It's not like I could use the same soup or the same tare. It's generally there's little crossover. Wow. So it's like, okay, I'm adding 36 plus hours to my workload to make one day's meal. Dang.
That's impressive. From my experience, it turned out really well. So keep doing whatever you're doing. You know better than everybody. But as far as like ramen goes, what is your favorite, whether it's, style of ramen dish or place that you've been to?
Tokyo for sure. Tokyo is so good. The food scene, anything from ramen to yakitori to pretty much any cuisine you can think of, it's really, really good in Tokyo. But as far as ramen goes, shio and shoyu, that's bread and butter.
Cool.
And then Naboshi ramen from there, dipping ramen. Jiro I had the first time last trip, a proper one. I went to the original, the Hotan, the first shop. So I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to try the original, how it tasted, and it was really delicious. Yeah, not healthy at all. It is not a healthy bowl, but it was delicious.
Sometimes you go for the healthy option. Sometimes you just want the best, fattiest, meatiest, noodliest thing possible.
Because shio shoyu, you can eat that every day, and it's clean, it's healthy. But you can get some monster bowls that are just junk food.
Ugh. Yeah, no, big fan. I try to eat healthy, maybe 75, 80% of the time. But those 20%, I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to have something I really want. And that's when I would go for that experience over the other. Ichizu's open, doing great, still having specials, but I know that the upstairs, kind of like the bar lounge area, work in progress. I was excited to talk to you and hear that Scott Gardner was involved in it because he is, whatever bar experience he touches usually turns to gold, and there's a lot of examples of that, but I'm curious of timeline, kind of the vibe you're going for or what we can expect.
Yeah, because it's going to be a little bit different vibe than downstairs, because downstairs is more traditional ramen shop, in and out. You're eating bowls and getting out. Upstairs is going to be more of an izakaya type bar vibe. So relax, spend a little bit more time, have different cocktails, different little bites to eat. We're also going to do vinyl records. Yes. So, real fun vibe, just relaxing, good izakaya type vibes. And Scott's been a huge help because, bars not my specialty. I know nothing about bars, and it's like, well,
you learned last time you did something you didn't know how to do.
Exactly. It's like, okay, who's got some of the best bars? Okay, Scott, help me, please. So Scott's been a big help. We're putting together a cocktail menu. It's going to be simple. Nothing too crazy, nothing too fancy, because, we're still a ramen shop first and foremost, but simple, well executed Japanese style cocktails. So that's what we're going for.
Perfect. That's because I'm excited. I will at some point put this bar crawl together of I don't know where I would start, where I would end. It'd either have to be like Waterwitch or Bar Gnome or HK Brewing, because like start at one of those and then go like, we'll just start at HK for the conversation, but like HK, TF, Fisher, Ichizu when it's ready, Water Witch, Barnum, and if you need another one out of there, I don't know what to say because I would probably be ready to go home by then. But it just like that whole area, it's so fun to see how it just keeps getting better somehow, and so I'm excited for that. I mean, next edition to start coming through.
Yeah.
But I mean, outside of ramen and your world of that, I mean, what are some of your other favorite places you like to go to in Salt Lake when you need a break from it?
Ooh, it really depends. Depends on what I'm in the mood for. Like if you're doing dim sum, New Golden Dragon, hot pot. I've been digging Happy Lamb mostly for hot pot lately. Okay. And then, Coyote's got some interesting ideas. So like, I like their fish and a couple other dishes that they do.
Yeah, they have a lot of really other good dishes too.
So they got some good dishes going. Ochre, Ochre's Angie's place is always.
Yeah, I've only been once, and because it was for brunch, but I need to go back and give it like a proper whirl. Because anything that gets like a James Beard nomination, like that should be a trigger effect of go. Like there's no reason not to.
Yeah. So those are some of that are in the rotation. There's some other ones I tried. I won't name names, but there's some not so good ones. But
yeah, the bell curve exists everywhere. Yeah. Not everything's going to be great. It all works itself out, and yeah, the bottom fall out and the top stay there, and we keep adding. Because again, like that's how restaurant scenes get better. I've never heard of a city restaurant scene getting better just because a bunch of restaurants were like, you know what, actually we're going to start doing a lot better.
Yeah.
It usually just goes to their demise and then someone replaces them.
Yeah.
And it's also fun to see how much, like the trend I've seen recently is there's kind of people who have come to the Salt Lake food scene and like a little bit like of a dubious nature from a lot of, whether it be like landlords or investors or whatever, they're like, you've never done this. Like, why would we cut you a check? And then now they're expanding and creating second, third locations. The two that come to mind is, Mateo, where he started this restaurant, pandemic project started, opened this location on 9th South. And then now he just moved downtown. Love that. And then you have, Max and Noah at Central 9th, who now they're finding a space downtown to open up their original idea of like a fine dining location.
Nice.
And so it's like, there's just so many cool things happening and so many new people coming to the table instead of just the same. And there's nothing wrong. There's a lot of great restaurateurs and entrepreneurs in Salt Lake that have done really, really well. But it's nice to see kind of this next generation, these new faces come in and be like, hey, you know what? Like people have done it. We can do it. Like, and now look at what we did. Yeah. And so it's exciting to see, more people, you included, show up to the table and be like, hey, we can make food too, and people love it. So yeah, fight for that space at the table. I didn't grow up hunting a lot. Like my grandparents both were from Uinta Basin. My grandpa literally had to hunt to feed his family when he was a kid. And I'd go pheasant hunting with him, but I never actually went any sort of big game or elk. But elk is the only gamey meat. Like if someone gives me venison, I'm like, I'm okay. Yeah. I'd rather go pick up something on the way home. Yeah. Pheasant, I'd rather just have not pheasant, especially if I bite into a BB. But elk is special. Elk is a great meat. I've yet to have an elk dish where I was like, oh, I don't like this. The story that always comes to mind is I was on my mission in Washington and I was in this place called Longview, kind of very, it's not rural, but it's kind of a lower economic place, but go to this family's house and it was a spaghetti with meat sauce and I eat. I'm like, oh, this is really good. And they're like, oh yeah. Do you like it a lot? I'm like, yeah. Well, do you know it's elk? I'm like, no, but it makes sense. I've had elk. This isn't, because it would always be this shocker factor, but I was like, oh yeah, no, I've had this. I was grown with this and I get it. But the thought of bringing elk to ramen, it makes sense because it is a very fatty, beef-esque type flavor profile, and ramen is pretty much made with the quality. Just you talking about the chicken, it's the quality of the fat that can make everything better. But curious how those two came together.
Yeah, so elk, I've always loved elk. Elk is a great game meat, and I agree. It's not because deer, I'm kind of maybe. I'm not going to go out of my way to eat deer, but I will go out of my way to eat elk. Elk is fantastic. It's got a good flavor profile. It's extremely healthy. It's extremely nutrient dense. And the way that came about, so ramen is very regionalized. It's all about okay, well, and so in northern Japan, in Sapporo, they make Sapporo miso ramen. So it's cooked in a wok. It's a chintan-based broth. There's a little bit of fat back in it, and that's like their dish. That's their take on ramen. You go to Tokyo, and then you're going to have shio shoyu. You're going to have very clean, elegant chintons. You go south, you're going to have pork python. So every area has their own thing. And so when I'm talking with some of my ramen chef friends, they're like, okay, well, what's American ramen? What is your ramen? It's like, no, that's our ramen. What's your ramen?
Yeah, we don't have one. We stole your guys.
Yeah. It's like, we stole your ramen. We don't have our own ramen. So the elk came about as like, okay, I need something that's Utah, that's unique, and that we can put our hat on and say, this is our ramen. And that's how elk came about.
Well, I like that. Because it is, elk is a very Utah.
It's a very Utah thing.
Because like when I think of, again, if I were to make a dish that has to be ramen, again, you have to have some sort of protein profile. The only things like Utah-esque come to mind is elk and like trout. Yeah. And I can't imagine, I'm trying to think of how I would make ramen with trout or how that would work.
Do a shio trout. It's doable. It takes some work, but it's doable.
But not as obvious.
But it's not as obvious as elk. And elk tastes so good. It's just like, elk has its own challenges because it's such a lean animal. You get very little fat off of it. So it's a challenge working with elk.
Yeah, it makes sense. No, I'm excited. I'll have to try that one next time I go. Because again, like it's nice to have like a Utah ramen.
Yeah.
Because if I were to think about like an American ramen, just letting my brain chew on that, I don't love I think about sushi and being like, oh, here's this roll that just got set on fire that was deep fried.
That's American sushi right there.
Yeah. Throw that into a ramen dish and that seems closer to what an American ramen dish. But yeah, I love that you kind of have this like stamp of being like, hey, this is the Utah ramen.
Yeah.
Check it out. And then so when you go back, you're like, hey, you know how you're asking about American ramen?
Yeah, exactly. Now we got our own thing. You will not find this in Japan. You have to come here to get this.
Exactly. And then we can then they can come and be like, all right, it's our turn to come try out some ramen and try something new.
Yeah. So the plan is we've been working with our suppliers. We're trying to get that as a consistent menu item. Just getting consistent available bones has been a challenge, but supposedly that will work itself out in the near future. So we're planning to have that on the menu full time.
Cool. No, I'm excited for that one. If it's as good as everything else I've had, then I don't worry for a second.
Yeah.
Because even the first time I came, it was in middle of the summer, and I even walked in, I was like, I don't feel like ramen right now.
Yeah, it's like 100 degrees outside. Do I want hot soup right now?
But that's why I like the dipping ramen. Because it's like you still get ramen, but it's not like this boiling pot of. It's like kind of like this in between place, and I really like. There's a thing for everything, and I like that there's so many things that you're trying because again, it's things that you've experienced, you've studied, you've known, you've learned from the masters, and then to be like, hey, we know you love this that you've experienced. But we're going to bring you over to this side now. Yeah. And so the more of that, especially if it's a little, Utah flair, a little Mike flair, then we'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, want to end with the two questions I always ask everybody at the end of every episode. Number one, if you could have someone on the Small Lake City podcast and hear more about what their story, what they're up to, who would you want to hear from?
Or I would say Brandon, but Brandon's already done one. Let me think who else would be good. Maybe the Central Ninth guys or Scott.
Scott. Yeah. Scott, I need to corner. I want to talk to Scott. Yeah. Like Scott is the man. So I'm going to have to corner him again and be like, hey, listen, it's time. Because he has so much knowledge. He's so good at what he does too. And I also love that. Actually, I never really thought about this like this before, but now it makes sense it makes sense why you would choose him specifically outside of his bar experience. Cause you walk into Barnum and it's a very Asian inspired restaurant.
Yeah. And
so you're like, hey, listen, same, but different. Come help me out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Japanese cocktails, vinyl. I'm excited. I will be there and you'll be like, Eric, it's time to go. You've been here for like 3 hours. I'm like, it's a couple more drinks. And then I'll take some more ramen. And then also if people want to keep up to date with Ramen Ichizu menu information, what's the best place to go?
Pretty much Instagram. I post quite a bit on Instagram for everything.
Good. That's where I go. And
so that's basically where I live.
Yeah. Same. My screen time recently, I used to pay a lot of attention to it, but now, in the last month, I've just realized everything I want the podcast to be and the way to make it successful, I have to be that person now. And so I've just leaned into it. And it's fun to see it's interesting. I have a lot of random Instagram friends I just DM and that's our lives. But follow him on Instagram. Elk is coming, bar is coming, lots of optimism in the air. I'm excited for all of it. I mean, there's always space for people at the top. Yeah, I mean, keep crushing it. I can't wait for the next ramen place, which is going to be even more special, unique, nuance, or who knows, maybe we'll go another direction. But whatever it is, it'll be great, and I'll be there for it. But Mike, thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's fun to sit
man.
down and chat. Everybody go support him. Go get some ramen. Try something new. And yeah, can't go wrong there.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Salt Lake City Podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, review, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. And we'll catch you next week. We'll see you there.